Logan, and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, May 5th, 2016. Happy Cinco de Mayo if you're celebrating today. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. It is great to be back with these guys. The A-team is in the house. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and Sports Illustrated, and his mic is not rubbing up against his chest hair this week.
Not yet.
Not yet. So stay tuned. And of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. I'm happy to be back. It has been a while. Before we start today, guys, I would like to dedicate today's episode to the late Jordan Parsons, who tragically passed away yesterday, member of the Bellator MMA team. He was preparing to fight on May 14th. Unfortunately, early Sunday morning was involved in a horrendous car accident, a hit and run, and early yesterday he tragically passed away at the young age of 25. So our thoughts and our well wishes and prayers go out to his family, his team, his teammates, and anyone who knows Jordan Parsons, because by all accounts he was very much beloved by anyone who came in contact with him and seemed like a great young man. So we send our condolences to his family, and we dedicate this episode of the MMA Beat to the late Jordan Parsons. Always tough to make a transition there from something like that, but the MMA community is a very strong one, and I wanted to mention that off the top. I will try my best to move on. Let's start with some fight news, guys. Yesterday was a very busy day for the UFC. Nothing officially announced. Actually, one fight was officially announced, and we'll get to that one in a second, but I want to start with Tyron Woodley versus Robbie Lawler. Now, we know that UFC 201 will take place in Atlanta, Georgia, their first time back in Atlanta since UFC 145, and right now they're targeting Woodley versus Lawler for the UFC welterweight title. Now, the fight is not official. It is not a done deal. Contracts have not been signed, but that's what they want. And this fight, I think of all the fights talked about yesterday, was met, in my opinion, with the most mixed reaction by the fans. What do you guys make of it? I'll start with you, Luke.
I think if it was a co-main event, I don't know that I would be too bothered by it. It's a suitable co-main event.
Not so much the place on the card, but just the fact that they're going with Woodley. That's what everyone seems to be talking about.
You know, once they put McDonald and Thompson together, I felt like the toothpaste was out of the tube at that point. I think after Thompson had that emphatic, dramatic win over Hendricks, a lot of people thought, hey, let's just go ahead and give him a title shot. That wasn't to be. They went ahead and booked him with Rory McDonald. We've talked about that ad nauseum. So what's really left? You got Kelvin Gastelum and Johnny Hendricks trying to get their things back together again. You could have done a Condit rematch. I don't know why they didn't. There might be some reasons that we don't really know. I don't know if you know anything about that.
No, that was just never really on the table.
So there you go. So when you look at that, it's like really who's left out there. And, you know, look, I don't know what kind of chance Woodley stands, but it moves the division along. It keeps things flowing. So not the sexiest choice, not the most fun, awesome choice, but maybe the right one just for reasons other than, hey, what's the best fight we can sell?
What do you make of it?
I mean, I would echo what Luke said. I also was really high on the Stephen Thompson title shot. That was the one that I really thought that he had earned with that victory over Johnny Hendricks.
Right.
I mean, he shot way up in the rankings with that.
Agreed.
But when he did that, I felt as though he had just leapfrogged a bunch of guys. The top of that list of guys he leapfrogged, in my opinion, was Tyron Woodley. I thought Woodley was a guy who had earned the shot, and I remember thinking at the time, you know, damn, just his luck. He gets a guy, goes out there and has this amazing performance and jumps over him. Well, of course, that wasn't to be. Now we've got, you know, Thompson in an awesome fight with Rory McDonald. I feel as though Woodley earned that shot. I was not a big fan of the rematch with Condit. You know, you have a close, contentious battle with the champion, but you lose and you're the challenger. I just don't see a rematch being the right way to go. And this is the guy. This is the guy who earned his spot. So I'm all in favor of it.
It's a complicated division, right? I mean, we had Robbie Lawler sitting in a limbo while other scenarios were maybe going to happen for him. Like we thought maybe Conor McGregor at one point, if he won his fight against Diaz, would be getting that fight possibly, or there was GSP sort of lurking out there. Maybe we were going to get that fight. When you really consider all the guys that, like you're mentioning, that could get it, he was certainly like one of the top guys. So there for a while, I was pretty convinced that Woodley should be the guy. But time passes, and he's only fought once in 2015. And you know how it works, man. It just keeps getting shaken up with every card that goes by. He got a little bit forgotten in that mix, I think. But ultimately, I don't have any big problem with it. As a headliner, I'm a little bit, I don't know. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit on the MMA Hour. For whatever reason, Robbie Lawler puts on these fights of the year. You always feel like he's going to be there and he's going to do that. This reiteration of him that we're getting now, this reborn fighter, but it just doesn't carry over to the mainstream for whatever reason. So I don't think Woodley's going to be the guy that's going to move that needle. So it was a little bit surprising if it's the main event on that level, but not in terms of the other stuff. But if the other thing is, it's happening at the end of July, correct?
Correct.
So,
July 30th.
I mean, June is when Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fights Rory McDonald. I feel like there could, if Wonderboy goes in there and just destroys Rory McDonald like he did with Hendricks, I mean, there's a clear-cut contender to wait out that timeline of 5 or 6 weeks. So I feel like it meshes up just enough to make sense for me.
Well, I sort of feel for Robbie Lawler here. You know, to your point, he was in the running for some pretty massive fights. There was some talk of him fighting Conor McGregor had he won at 196, some talk of him fighting GSP potentially, even Nick Diaz, which ironically, Diaz comes back like a day later. His suspension is up literally, 2 days later because July is 31st. And now he's left with probably the least sexiest of options. And by the way, he's playing bridesmaid to UFC 200. So a lot of people are going to buy that card, I'm assuming. And let's just say Conor is coming back as Dana predicted, 201. It's not going to happen on that card, but maybe 202, 203. They're going to save for that. So there's a good chance that card doesn't do very well on pay-per-view. You got to feel for Robbie Lawler a little bit. I'm just happy, though, that they're finally booking him in a fight. And as you mentioned, the division can roll along here. I do believe if Stephen Thompson wins, and if Rory McDonald wins as well, they should be the #1 contender, but you can't keep Lawler on the sidelines for another month and a half and hope to book him against the winner of that fight, because that fight could be a 5-round, destruction for either guy, and now he's sitting out even longer.
Plus, there's a time to move the needle, and there's a time to move the sport forward. I've talked about this a million times, and people probably are tired out there of hearing it, but there's a time to just say, okay, here's the champion, here's the guy who's the #1 contender, bring them together, and not be thinking, oh, which is the fight that's going to sell, which is the fight that's going to move the needle, so to speak. I recognize that combat sports are different from other sports, and that becomes part of the equation. But at the uppermost level of it, when you are wearing one of those belts around your waist, you got to take on the next best guy.
I also feel like Woodley, if you compare him to Wonderboy, has so little momentum behind him that hurts. If he was winning at least, and all these things, if he was active and all these things were in play, like playing bridesmaids at 200, that's just the nature of the beast. He hasn't fought since January of 2015. That's crazy,
And it wasn't an emphatic win.
It wasn't.
It's not the type of win that you'd be like, wow, that's going to stay in your memory bank and carry you all the way through a year and a half. It just wasn't that kind of win.
I'm somewhat surprised that they went with him, only because they've been adamant in the past about not giving the shot to someone who's waiting around for a title shot and all that. He did have some bad luck. It's worth noting he was supposed to fight in October against Hendricks. Hendricks failed to make weight, and at the time it seemed like they were sort of promising him a title shot, but then it makes it weird because Hendricks came back a few months later and Wonderboy ended up beating him, so he got the win over the guy who he didn't fight. Right. What a strange, what a strange
that
division.
Has been
it's
very
a mess.
strange for the last year.
It's a mess, and you have to think that Lawler deep down inside was kind of hoping and praying that it would be GSP. This hopefully, at least for now, stops the GSP talk. Right. And GSP has said that he's not even that interested in fighting for the belt at the moment. So it looks like it's going to be Woodley versus Lawler. At least that's what they want. Let's see if it actually gets done. Let's go to the Fox card the week before. That's July 23rd. And again, yesterday, we could talk about this in a minute, just the way this is all being presented. But let's just talk for a second about Holly Holm versus Valentina Shevchenko as the main event of that Fox card. Now, we know that Holm wanted the rematch. A lot of people wanted to have her fight. Fans wanted to have her fight at 200 against Miesha Tate. And now they're going a couple weeks later with Holm main eventing on Fox, which is still, I think, a feather in one's cap, against a relatively unknown fighter in Shevchenko. Do you like this fight for Holly Holm?
Yeah, this is a weird one, right? Because, first of all, this is a tough fight for Holly Holm. Shevchenko didn't set the world on fire in her UFC debut, although she beat Kaufman, and she didn't look all that awesome against Nunes, although she gradually got better and she took that third round. Had it gone 5, I would have, I believe she would have won. Mm-hmm. This will be a 5-round fight, so we'll see how it goes. But Shevchenko's nasty on the feet. This is obviously where this fight is going to be contested. This is no gimme. I saw some people being like, this is a tune-up fight for Holly Holm. No, it is not. This is the last thing from a tune-up fight. This is a very, very dangerous fight. Like, all the credit in the world to Holly Holm for accepting it. That's the first thing I thought when I saw it. I was like, ooh, that's a tough one. The second thing I thought about was, like, again, this this is your headliner over.
So some of the other fights being discussed.
AJ Teixeira?
Yeah, AJ Teixeira, Anthony Johnson, Glover Teixeira, and also Gilbert Melendez, Edson Barbosa.
I can understand that one not headlining, but Teixeira and Johnson's fought in a headlining role on Fox, and so was Teixeira.
Recently.
And those two made a lot of sense. Plus, I mean, that fight is just going to be bonkers to watch, right? So I was like, that's a little odd. Now she is, the woman who beat Ronda Rousey. She is the woman who fought on a big card. She has a lot of momentum. It's not that I am somehow offended at the notion of Holly Holm headlining. It just feels a little bit underwhelming. Is not quite the right word. I'm not sure weird is quite the right word. It just feels like there was this whole variety of choices that the UFC had the chance to go with, one of which was that Miesha Tate rematch, and they didn't. And so it left them with this series of suboptimal choices, and frankly, risky choices that both fighters took. And as a consequence, it's not that this is somehow an improper card or a bad card. This is quite a good card. I'm looking forward to this fight. But it just feels like the risk doesn't, like if you were going to pivot away from Tate, you would pivot towards something that would maybe give you a better option. It's not clear to me how this is the better option.
I actually love the fact that it's the main event on Fox because I feel like they're capitalizing on the fact that Holly Holm did beat Ronda Rousey. I think she's a lot more popular outside of the MMA world than some of us actually think. I mean, you look at it, again, I talk about this from time to time, her social media is gigantic, over 1 million followers on Instagram and things like that. A lot of people know who Holly Holm is, and I think a lot of people tuned into 196 for Holly Holm. Of course, McGregor-Diaz, they were the show, but a lot of those people knew who Holly Holm was. And I like the fact that they're kind of switching it up. It's very UFC to go with Glover, Anthony Johnson. They're saying, no, we're going to put the women in the main event, and I think that that's thinking about the Fox audience. The Fox audience, the casual audience, knows Holly Holm much more than Glover and AJ, even though they actually main evented the last 2 Fox cards.
Against Shevchenko.
What's the difference? It's the Holly Holm show, the way you promote it.
Unless you're Ronda Rousey, you need 2 people to sell a fight. That's just how it goes.
What do you think?
Well, it's not a tune-up fight. I would agree with Luke, but I also think that it's a fight that allows Holly Holm to showcase her skill set without, they put her in with somebody who is, what were their 3 options? It could be somebody who's well-rounded, who's not as good a striker as her and okay grappler, or they could put her in with a person who's very grappling heavy and who's going to maybe take her out of her element, or they could put her in with somebody who also has a striking pedigree, and that's what they've done. So they're giving Holly Holm an opportunity to shine at the thing that she's best at. And how can you argue with that?
And they're giving her a main event slot. Sure. This could maybe at least temporarily quiet the notion that she's in the doghouse. Getting that main event slot on Fox is, that's a nice spot to be in.
I think it came off as weird, or whatever word you want to use for this, because she just wasn't in the conversation with Holly Holm. I felt like we've been with Holly Holm. It's been like the Ronda Rousey. This is the big light at the end of the tunnel, right? Like there's this Ronda Rousey rematch, and we keep going down these side streets now. She did the Miesha Tate thing. Now she's going to fight somebody else in a main event, regardless. And I think it just feels like we're getting further and further away. If Holly Holm loses this fight, we may never get that fight. We may never see that rematch. I think we probably would at some point, but we may never do it at that point. It's not like Holly Holm is so young in the game and all that stuff. She's getting up there in age a little bit, and you just wonder what that would be like. But there's another part of me that looks at it and says, Holly Holm realistically has one amazing fight in the UFC so far, and that was it was the Ronda Rousey one. I mean, her fight with Miesha Tate was very good, but she ended up losing the fight in the end. Mm-hmm. Her other 2, she was pretty underwhelming. We were talking about how she just wasn't ready for Ronda Rousey at that point. The division is sort of like this. I feel like every now and again when there's limited options, you're going to get this type of thing. But I just feel like Holm, I mean, it goes backwards though, right? You wanted to see Holm probably in the rematch with Miesha Tate because that kept the conversation alive of the top people that we were trying to pair up, and now here we are going down a side street. And that's the only thing that makes it a little weird for me is just it's a little digressive, I guess.
This is the other point. Like in fairness to the UFC, if you look at that women's division right now, there weren't a lot of clear choices about who you could use. Everyone's tied up. Jessica Ai is tied up. Sarah McMahon's tied up. But I think the only one who's not tied up in that whole contender list is Liz Carmouche. So you want to do Liz Carmouche versus Holly Holm?
Sarah Kaufman as well, but her contract has expired and they're friends.
Right.
They're training partners.
So there's just not a lot of great choices there. Shevchenko, again, it's going to be a really tough, awesome fight. So in that sense, I guess the UFC did what they could. I guess although Lauren Murphy was on Twitter complaining that she had accepted it.
I would like to clear that up.
Okay,
go ahead.
Point real quickly if I can, but I really think your point is correct. It was one thing to say, people were like, oh, you shouldn't take, if you're Holly Holm, you shouldn't take this Miesha Tate fight. You should wait for Ronda because it's too risky. I actually think this fight is riskier in some ways than that other fight because to your point, it's exactly correct. If you lose that fight against Miesha Tate, and presuming you're going to get a rematch if it's close, and you lose, you're still in that orbit. Shevchenko is barely ranked in the top 15.
Yeah.
If you lose to her, you sink, I mean, so far away.
Yeah.
That is a massive risk. And Shevchenko's ranking is not reflective of her ability. To me, this is a major, major risk for her.
Which kind of makes it more interesting as a fight. I mean, it's fun when there's a risk involved.
Sure.
We can remove ourselves
I'm not
from her
bad-mouthing it.
business.
I'm just saying, you know.
No, but I get what you're saying. There were 3 fights in the running for Holly Holm. One of them was Lauren Murphy, and from what I'm told, she agreed to that fight. The UFC went in a different direction. Now, Lauren Murphy versus Holly Holm, to me, makes less sense than Shevchenko. I think Shevchenko is the stronger fighter at this point. Don't you guys agree? I mean, Lauren could probably sell the fight more. She's actually very entertaining on Twitter, but that felt underwhelming to me. Am I crazy here?
I think you're right about that. I mean,
Holly Holm did not turn down that fight,
If you're
though.
just looking at it as a matchup, like, to me, I agree with you 100%.
Well, you have 2 high-level strikers in Shevchenko and Holm. The issue is no one knows who Shevchenko is. You know, that's the problem here. I like the fact that they're doing it close to 200 as well. You always want to be fighting around the time that the title is being defended. And if you think about New York and the potential return of Ronda Rousey, fighting in July kind of meshes with that timeline too. So I'm happy that they're keeping her busy. To me, that's the best thing. You said there's really no one else. You're right. So, you know, the Miesha Tate ship has sailed. We can't cry over spilled milk. Let's just, you know, there I am with two what are those called? Cliches?
Yeah.
Back to back. That was pretty impressive to do that back to back.
Professional broadcaster.
Yeah, how about that? Wow. The ship has sailed,
your metaphors.
crying over spilled milk. Am I mixing them?
Yeah, I think so.
Why? Did I mess that up?
I don't know. Was there milk on the ship? I mean, I guess.
Oh, okay, fine. That was kind of 2 thoughts, but maybe a semicolon in there. But again, I like the fact that they're putting her in the main event. Now, let's presume that the co-main event is Glover versus Anthony Johnson. I hate this fight. I hate this fight from a ranking standpoint, from what it means for the division standpoint. That fight is very fun on paper. I mean, if we just ignore all that stuff, it's fun. I want to, like, yes, I like the idea of those 2 guys fighting each other because it's probably going to be entertaining. But when you consider the light heavyweight division and the lack of depth there, the lack of options for the winner of DC versus John Jones, which right now is taking place July 9th, if Glover wins and John Jones wins, we're going to see Glover, John Jones too? Yeah. You're eliminating Anthony. Anthony is the prime #1 contender, and he's willing to wait. This feels like you're making a fight just to make a fight, and I feel like it could backfire on them. What do you guys think?
I think that if Anthony Johnson wants to get a shot at John Jones, he should be able to beat Glover Teixeira.
Fair enough, although hasn't he done enough? Like, wasn't he kind of problem?
After Alexander Gustafsson got a title shot after
That's
losing,
true. What the hell am I talking?
Who hasn't done enough?
That's true. That's true.
I guess I'll split the difference. I think you're right. This is one of those contender killer fights, or could be.
Yeah.
But the fight is so attractive on paper. You know, it's just so interesting. Not one of those fights that needs to happen, but one of those fights where you're like, ooh, okay, I'll take that. Also, I favor Anthony Johnson to win. There was another option you could have gone. You could have saved Glover for the winner of Corey Anderson versus Shogun. Presuming a Shogun wins, you could maybe make that fight happen, right, to save Anthony Johnson. But, you know, look, to his point he made earlier, you didn't have to make this fight, but sometimes, look, contenders want to win a shot. You want a shot at the title, you got to earn it. I like Anthony Johnson's chances, and yeah, I agree. Glover versus Jones too would be.
If Glover wins and Jones
Baltimore
wins,
of fights?
yes. If they both win, do you care to see that fight again?
No, I don't.
That's
Which
the
is
problem.
Big risk. It's the big risk.
The problem is, like you said, I mean, the division just has been stagnant for so long, and that is in part because John Jones has basically wrecked that division, and you don't really want to see any of those guys except for maybe Cormier get a shot. You know, I mean, it really, there's not a lot of guys in that division. You're like, well, I would love to see part 2 of that. You know, it's sort of the flyweight division we were talking about a little bit. You know, it's to the point where Demetrius Johnson doesn't really have anybody left to fight, and I feel like John Jones is in a similar position, honestly, because OSP was the guy that was kind of coming up, and now he's, you know, he had to face him on short notice. There's just not that many guys below that. There aren't any of these prospects coming up that you're like, watch out for that guy. And Anthony's the only guy. I mean, so I see it both ways. I really do, because I'm like, Anthony Johnson, to me, that's the one big fight left in that division for John Jones if he gets through Cormier and all that stuff. So it's, and even if it was Cormier and Johnson again, I mean, that was a fun fight for me. I wouldn't mind seeing that again. But there's still major intrigue to see his power against John Jones, you know, to see Johnson. So I would have been completely happy if he chose to wait, but at the same time, looking at that fight with Glover Teixeira and how their styles kind of go against each other, it's hard not to like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even if you are killing off one of the contenders in there.
Let's not forget Rumble Johnson. It's not like as though he is an up-and-coming guy who has not had his shot. He did compete for this very belt not too long ago.
Sure.
So this would be the second coming. I know possibly against another opponent and possibly against John Jones as opposed to Cormier, but it's not a completely a contender killing fight because both these guys have had a shot at the belt.
Yeah, it's fair. I guess for some reason I view that first shot at 187 like an interim title fight because it was just so fresh after Jones getting stripped, and it's not the lineal belt. So
I think John Jones would agree with you.
yes.
You made a point earlier. I think that's the correct one. Like, why does the UFC make fights? Well, to sell pay-per-views, to move a division. Sometimes it's to fill out a card. Sometimes it's to fill out a card in ways that would make sense for just that event's purpose. It doesn't necessarily have a larger purpose, and it carries, in fact, costs and risk associated with it that they kind of gamble on. That's very much a UFC thing to do, isn't it?
In 2016.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't the case in 2007.
Because they have more
crap.
assets to back them up in the event that something fails. So I to me, it feels very much UFC. And look, the other thing is, if Anthony Johnson can't be Glover Teixeira and he can't be Daniel Cormier, I think the chorus of people being like, he should fight Jones, I'm not saying it would die down, but the argument gets a little bit harder to make if he can't beat those two guys that John Jones frankly kind of handled over the course of 10 rounds.
Yeah.
And also
Not playing MMA math.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
I also would wonder whether the UFC is starting to think about a 205-pound division without John Jones in it. Not in the same way that he was eliminated from competition over the last 15 months, but also he has a certain amount of fights left there, maybe not too many, before he starts moving up to heavyweight. And so these other guys are going to have to scrap to become the belt holder.
Though, if he beats Cormier at UFC 200 and let's say Glover wins, and that's just not an attractive option, although I kind of feel like they'll just do the rematch at that point. If he leaves at some point soon as champion and just vacates the title, that division is going to feel even weaker. Like there's no one really coming up in the pipeline right now. There's nothing.
Remember in 2013 after Jones fought Gustafsson, that's the fight we wanted to see more than. It's crazy that he's had the other fights with these other guys and lost, and he's now out of it. I mean, it's just. It consumes itself that way. That there's the guys who are good are capable of beating each other within that middle ground, and then you have a guy like, I guess Cormier belongs in that space up there with Jones. That's why this becomes the last big compelling fight for the time being, and that's why it becomes that much more stake-oriented for somebody like Johnson to get through Glover Teixeira to be like one more guy to add to that before we have discussed maybe Jones's time has come to bounce out of there.
Though, if Gustafsson comes back and wins one fight impressively, I feel like they'll put him right back in there.
It's hard not to love that dude too. I mean, just his fight with Cormier and his fight with Jones. I mean, those fights are like classics.
Tremendous, yeah.
I mean, it's almost like he goes out there, he's willing to die in his fights, and they definitely stick with you a long time. And the unfortunate one was obviously the one in his home country against Johnson. So I mean, that's the one that I felt really sent him down sort of in the middle of that pack.
Yeah, you wonder what he's going to look like when he comes back, like what kind of damage those losses have done to him. Throwing him, that fight against Cormier was great, but throwing him right back in there after the knockout loss, that might affect his career forever, I think. Another fight that is targeted for that card, actually this was the lone fight that was made official by the UFC. Gilbert Melendez finally returning, and he'll be facing Edson Barbosa, who's coming off that fantastic win over Anthony Pettis. Initially, when I heard about this fight, I didn't love it just because Gilbert has been out for a year. He's still suspended because of the positive PED test following UFC 188 in Mexico last year. And Barbosa's coming off that big win, but then when you look at the division and who's at the top, there aren't that many options for Barbosa right now. Do you like the fact that Gilbert is getting a big fight on a big stage against a top contender after coming off of the suspension? Like, once you serve the suspension, should all be forgotten and you're right back where you were? Like, he would be fighting in this fight if it was last year coming off that, Alvarez fight. So should it all be forgotten, or should you have to work your way up? You know what I mean? How do you feel like they should handle this?
I love it.
You like it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, look, it was when you had TRT Vitor out there head kicking people.
Yeah.
I think they were like, God, this guy's a menace. He's a threat. Not really to the division, but to like people's safety. Melendez looked kind of flat in his last fight. It wasn't a particularly awesome run. I actually think this is mostly about Barbosa too. Also, who's available, but Barbosa is quietly. He just beat a former UFC champion. He's quietly got an incredible resume. We all know that his skills are terrifying. You can put him on any card, and he will, at a minimum, he's not going to sell a bunch of tickets, but if you see Barbosa's name on a card, you're like, there's some quality I can rely on.
Right.
And more than that, he's been quietly working on his English too.
Yes.
I'm not saying he's got the most dynamic personality in the world, but he's getting better. He's trying to be a more media-friendly person. Give him a name. I mean, look, Paul Felder is a tremendous talent, and they actually train together now. I had Paul Felder on my radio show yesterday, and they were saying, Barbosa's just getting a lot better. Give him a name where you can build this guy a little bit. He's never going to be a Conor McGregor. He's never going to be a tenth of that as a promotional entity, but he can be more than he is as he gets better, as he tries to become more accessible to the English-speaking public. And I like this Melendez fight. Put it on a big audience. Put it against a name that some people know. Melendez has fought on Fox before, so I think it's all good in the hood, man.
Side note, I'd love to see at some point, Lord knows I've tried, Melendez address that whole situation, especially given the team that he's a part of. I mean, he hasn't addressed it. He hasn't talked about it.
I've seen him at Bellator functions to try to get him to talk about it.
Yeah.
Steadfastly refuses.
So I'm curious to hear his side, or maybe his silence speaks for itself. What do you make of it?
He's not. If he were returning and getting a title shot or getting the number one
Melendez? Okay.
If he were returning from his suspension and getting that, the number one guy or the champion, that would be something I think I would have a problem with.
Yep.
For the reasons you stated. Instead, he's getting a guy who's rising in the rankings, but it's still, at a point where there's still some place to go.
Okay.
And who's also a killer out there. So it's certainly not an easier. I would say that most people would acknowledge that Gilbert Melendez is a bigger name than Edson Barbosa. And so anytime you're the guy who has the bigger name, there's a bigger risk. Just like the Holm fight we were talking about. There's always that risk when you're fighting somebody who's not as big a name as you and but is also a real threat. So it's a tough fight for Melendez. It's a tough fight for both guys, and that's what makes it interesting to watch.
Don't you guys think that we still cling to the Melendez that came over from Strikeforce? I feel like we still have this guy we were waiting to see show up like he looked. And I feel like right now, so far, he's had a couple of decent fights in the UFC, but I don't feel like we've seen the Melendez that we were supposed to get, the one that was behind the partition that we couldn't see before. We wanted to see when Pettis was the champ and he was the champ and Alvarez was over here. I feel like that's part of it. It's like they just want to keep him give him another chance at being that guy.
He also has a massive contract.
He has a massive contract, and that whole thing went down. I feel like that's why the fight's kind of happening, as a guy coming off a big win. And for Barbosa, like you mentioned, he's just, every time you see his name, you think, man, that's going to be fun. That's going to be a fun fight, regardless of who it is. And he has a chance to really, of that little relish tray of names I just mentioned that were all champions in the divisions. He has a chance to add a second guy right in a row after beating Pettis. That's pretty big for his resume. And I would say with all the things you're mentioning about his marketability kind of coming up, him learning English, just him being in big spotlights, if he's able to do that to Gilbert Melendez, I feel like his star starts to rise a little bit, especially when people who don't know him go back and look at some of his previous fights, just knocking out Edom and all those fights before. There's a lot of good quality fights that he didn't win, so I feel like this would be his moment. This would be his time to kind of shine here.
Even the fights he loses are awesome.
Yeah. That Ferguson.
It's crazy.
By the way, I don't have access to the YouTube comments as we're doing this live, but I can see them saying, "What about UFC 166, Melendez Sanchez? Is that not good enough for you, Chuck?"
It was good. I'm saying he's had a couple of decent fights, but I don't feel like he's showed up the way he looked in Strikeforce when he was just running the division. But
the competition is stiffer.
That's true.
I do get your point 100%. I was actually talking to Mark Henry, Barbosa's striking coach. By the way, I feel like that team might be the most underrated team in all of.
Oh my gosh!
And my theory is that they just don't have a name. I feel like people.
They don't have a branded name.
People always talk about Black House. That's not a team, but they always talk about them as one of the top teams. That's just a gym.
Yeah, it's Edgar, Felder, Barbosa,
Marlon Moraes, Eddie Alvarez, amongst Corey Anderson.
And they brought in Michael Chandler occasionally to have him work around.
Corey Anderson is there.
What's the name of his pizza joint?
Pino's Pizzeria.
They just call it Pino's. Come on,
Pino's
man.
would be a fantastic name. No, well, I think that they sort of call themselves Ricardo Almeida BJJ, but that doesn't. They need to come up with a name, those guys, because they are. They're killing it right now.
You can't name yourself after an MMA judge.
Yeah, that's a problem. Can you imagine like Team Doug Crosby? It would be Chael Sonnen, Jake Ellenberger, anyhow, Nick Lenz, Chuck Mindenhall.
Look at you go.
So anyway, yeah, so that team I feel like is criminally underrated. That's a different rant for a different day. And I also get the impression that they don't really care.
I think they love it.
Yeah, it is kind of a funny thing.
It's a Jersey thing.
It's a Jersey thing.
And Philly.
And Philly as well, yep. So I was talking to him yesterday, and he said that the Pettis fight, prior to the Pettis fight, was the first time Barbosa has officially moved to New Jersey. So in the past, he would do some of his camp in Florida and then come to New Jersey for the end. He's officially moved to New Jersey, and that's the first fight, the Pettis fight, after his move. And he was just raving how like it is imminent that he's going to be fighting for the belt. Now, how about this weird scenario that could play out very soon? Eddie Alvarez becomes the champion on July 7th, and Barbosa, both from the same team. What's going to happen there? That could be awkward.
Loser leaves town. I don't know. I even asked this.
Tyron Woodley and Robbie Lawler.
I asked Paul Felder, I was like, what was it like sparring with Edson Barbosa the first few times? He was like, it was weird. Like, it was not...
Oh, that's right. They fought,
Yeah,
yes,
because
that's right.
they had a tough fight. But they
Yes.
never talk trash on Twitter. But he said there was an adjustment period. But like, I feel like there's a lot of camps these days. Look at Tyron Woodley and Robbie Lawler.
Yes.
They're not ATT in the same hardcore way, but... You want to rise to the top. This is, I mean, eventually, you can't avoid this kind of thing. It's just inevitable.
And you mentioned that Gilbert is the bigger name than Barbosa, and I think in MMA circles he may be. He's never really broken through as like, even like when you do an interview with him or whatever, the numbers aren't fantastic. And I would argue that as far as UFC careers are concerned, like when you think about the Terry Adam knockout Barbosa had and some of those other great fights, the Ferguson fight, I feel like actually more UFC fans are attracted to Barbosa than Melendez at this point. Is that a crazy thought? I feel like he's
It's a little crazy.
It is crazy? All right. Fair enough.
Your point is right about Gilbert Melendez. He doesn't set the world on fire in terms of online things, but there are guys you beat who
Sure.
have a certain stature
Yeah.
that when you see that on their resume, you're like, this person is ready to take their career to the next level. And I think Melendez is just one, fairly or not, he's definitely one of those guys.
As a three-pack, Holm, Shevchenko, Glover, AJ, as much as I want to complain about the title ramifications, and then Barbosa, Melendez, is, in my opinion, a lot better than some of the recent Fox cards that we've gotten, at least this year. So
Well, they tried on this last one, right?
they did try, yeah, it wasn't their
just
fault.
kept falling through.
That's right.
And
So-
they put on CM Punk. Oh my God!
no chance they put CM Punk on free television.
Just saying.
Gotta get them pay-per-view
Yeah,
Chicago,
points.
it isn't really
That would be great.
Yeah, think outside
I had
the box.
I had a fan come tweet me yesterday saying, "When are we going to get a pay-per-view in Chicago? We haven't had a pay-per-view since 2008, the Cote Anderson Silva fight. Like, you guys get a card every year. Who cares?"
Everyone in Chicago can drop dead. That's how I feel. About
It used to be the complaint was
Now
that
we're
they
complaining-
always held them in like January.
Yes.
Remember? And it's, why don't they have it in the summer? Well,
Actually, if you're going live to the event, it's better to have the Fox cards if they start early. You don't have to
Absolutely.
wait
And
till
the tickets are always
Tickets
cheaper.
are always cheaper, and the cards are relatively good, so stop complaining, Chicago. Okay, one more fight that I want to talk about that came out yesterday. Also, this fight not official, but what they're targeting, which is a bit
unofficial
exhausting
fight
to
show.
keep.
We're
Yes.
gonna talk about
Where do you hear this stuff?
TJ Dillashaw versus Rafael Assuncao 2 at UFC 200. Now, I love this. This is the perfect UFC 200 fight. It's going to be on the prelims. It's a former champion avenging, his not most recent loss, but the loss before he lost the belt. This is a great fight. This is like, again, this fight comes out and people are like, this is not UFC 200-esque. This is on the prelims. Like what? This,
It's not the headliner. So,
this
yeah.
was in the running, very close to being made as the main event of the May 29th show in Las Vegas, which is being headlined by Cody Garbrandt against Thomas Almeida. This is a big fight for the prelims. And it's the perfect fight for both guys. Do we agree on this?
I do.
Okay.
I agree with you.
You guys your enthusiasm just about this fight. Maybe I'm a little too excited about it.
It's a funny fight because it's something. If you talk to TJ Dillashaw for a while, I feel like he wanted that fight back. Assuncao, he's just. I mean, the crazy thing is he's just fallen off the map. Essentially,
Yeah.
he hasn't fought since 2014. If you look at when they last fought, Dillashaw has had his career turned on his ear twice. I mean, just this whole world turned upside down by beating Renan Barão and losing it again to Dominic Cruz. It's like the whole world has changed for him twice. And then that whole time, Assuncao's like fought I think it's 2 times in that whole span. So it's one of those fights where I feel like for Assuncao, who was in that very top space with like 6 or 7 fight winning streak, he was in that space. Doesn't have the greatest name, but still he should have been in contention. he has to get through somebody. What better guy would he want to get through than Dillashaw, who had the belt, if he's going to make his mark as a contender? So from his side, I can see it, and from the other side, having the loss, I can see it. So to me, it makes a lot of sense, especially as with Cruz being busy at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that Dillashaw's funny in that there are all these fights that make sense for him from a marketing perspective, I guess I should say. This is one because it's a guy who beat him. Now that John Dotson is up in that division, there's another guy who beat him.
That's right.
And that would be an interesting fight. Another. Let's run that one back. And then of course he wants to get Dominic Cruz again. Of course there's also
You're
the
right. That's
opportunity.
good. Yeah.
Losses.
Then there's the guy he didn't lose to because he trained with him, Uriah Faber. Then there's and then there's anybody else who happens to be in Alpha Male that wants to
Cody
step in
Garbrandt.
with him, Garbrandt or something.
That's a good point.
So it's like it's almost as though his immediate and perhaps distant future, you could almost plot out all the fights he's going to have, the next 4 or 5 fights, and they would all make kind of sense, almost one after the other after the other.
That is a great point.
If he can win them.
It speaks to the bantamweight division right now. I think, to me, it's the richest division in the UFC. Yeah.
Over lightweight?
Yep. To me, it's more interesting than lightweight.
And
Look at you.
money-wise.
Look at the top 10. No, not money-wise.
kidding.
It's not making that kind of money. Dominic Cruz, Faber, Sterling, Dillashaw, Assuncao returning.
At least you have all those young guys, man, like coming up too.
Cody Garbrandt, Thomas Almeida, John Lineker, Dotson coming back.
I mean, we could do the same thing at lightweight, and a longer list.
I don't know. Look, it's debatable.
Really, are you kidding?
I don't think you think it's a 100% for sure fact that lightweight is deeper than bantamweight as far as the top 10 are concerned.
Oh, significantly.
What?
Significantly.
I disagree. I disagree.
It's okay. You're allowed to be wrong on the show.
No, but I'm allowed to disagree. Yeah.
Look, here's
We need to sit between you guys.
No, I mean this is barbershop talk. I like this kind of talk.
Here's you asked about the fight. Look, I wouldn't really disagree with anything you've said. I really wouldn't. And you too. Like you're trying to say what's great about Assuncao, Dillashaw fighting again. I would just defer to what you guys just said. But like, I don't know that I'm alone in. Like, why do you like what you like in this world? Maybe it naturally appeals to you. You feel something for it. I think you can learn to appreciate things, but there's generally just this gravitational pull. I don't feel anything when you say Dillashaw versus Assuncao. It doesn't get me out of my chair.
What would you have preferred? Dotson?
Yeah, the Dotson fight to me that would get me out of my chair.
Really?
Big time. To your point, I'm not saying bantamweight is not strong. Bantamweight's never been better.
Is it number 2? Not heavyweight. Not light heavyweight.
Definitely not heavyweight.
Not light heavyweight.
Not light heavyweight.
Not middleweight.
Middleweight's good.
Top heavy.
8 and up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's top heavy.
Welterweight is, I think, in transition.
Yeah.
I think lightweight is just a row of murderers.
Not flyweight, and featherweight's a bit top heavy as well.
Yeah, so I'd say bantamweight's probably number 2 in terms of at least most A, storylines, and then B,
Wasn't the case a year ago.
certainly not. No, look, there's a lot of young guys coming up. I like bantamweight. I just think lightweight is the most special division in mixed martial arts. It's the one where even when you can go to other organizations, regional organizations, and their lightweight division is stacked.
Fair.
And that you can't really replicate that with any other division.
Though, will you say that the lightweight division is more like it's filled with more veterans? Like, the Alvarezes, the RDAs of the world. Khabib is kind of a veteran at this point. Ferguson.
This is his prime.
And yeah, but I mean, like bantamweight is a lot of guys who haven't really main evented yet, haven't fought for belts.
Yeah,
You know what
I
I
guess
mean?
that's
Like
what you're looking
Sterling,
for. If you look at like Sterling's got this incredible upside.
Yes.
How's that going to play out?
Almeida, Garbrandt. We don't really know. You know what I mean?
Sure. In fact, we'll get to that later. But yeah, no, I like bantamweight.
No, but you were so adamant. I just wanted to make sure.
I just don't feel
Fair
like
enough.
lightweight has an equal, personally.
Fair enough. But a great point about Dillashaw. This guy all of a sudden has a ton of options.
Yeah.
And I
It's
actually
funny how the narrative is all around him. Like
Yeah.
when we're thinking about, even when you're saying like, what would move me is Dillashaw versus, so it's like the Assuncao one is the weird part of it, and I feel like that's been his dilemma the whole way, right? Even with his winning streak, nobody really is pining to see him in the big spotlight fights. So I feel like he has to get it somewhere, and if you're going to get it, it should be the guy who was the champion, and get the chance to leapfrog that guy.
Okay, so we begin the month of May. A lot of great fights this month. There's the Rotterdam show on Sunday. There's that big 198 show in Curitiba next Saturday. There's the May 29th show for Garbrandt and Almeida main eventing Memorial Day weekend. There's Bellator, which the co-main event falling out is a big loss for them. Michael Chandler, Josh Thompson. What sticks out? I think May June, July thus far, that's a pretty damn good stretch of fights, at least as far as the UFC is concerned. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And Kimbo Slice and James Thompson in
I mean,
July
come on.
too. I mean,
step on up.
okay, best fight in May. What is it?
Couple of good choices you can go with. I won't go with the obvious ones. I think I'll say Albert Tumanov versus
Yes.
Gunnar Nelson. I mean, come on, folks. If you don't get up for that one,
Are you surprised Gunner's the underdog?
no.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay.
Tumanov is a destroyer from the future, sent back in time to terrorize
Do you think he
us.
smokes him?
I don't think he smokes him, but I think he's going to win.
Okay.
Not handily, but maybe Rick Story-esque kind of way.
Fair enough.
He's a different fighter than Rick Story, though. But you get that. I also think it's a great month for flyweights. Well, I guess I should say bantamweight. Excuse me.
Yep.
What am I saying? Rob Font
The
taking
best
on
division
John.
in,
Yeah, right. The best one. Rob Font taking on John Lineker.
John Lineker, another one.
That is a super sick fight.
Thought you were
And
going to take the obvious ones. Come on, man.
well, and then shout outs to, well, I mean, you can always pick Fabricio Verdun, whatever, but, and then shout outs to Jorge Masvidal taking on Lorenz Larkin.
Good
I also think that's a sick
Yes.
fight.
Good fight.
What do you think, Jeff? What's circled on your schedule?
Well, I always like watching Demi Maia fight.
Yes.
That's a guy that I just find him just so masterful.
And we don't mention him in the welterweight
I'm about to say,
division.
if he wins that one, that changes the picture a little bit.
Against your good buddy Matt
Yeah.
Brown. I mean, that's a lot of fun. And we're probably going to skip over main events, but I'm actually a lot more jazzed to see Verdum defend the belt against Miocic than probably a lot of people. It seems like that's a title fight that, in a weird way, kind of flies under the radar. But I'm really I'm excited about that one too.
That's a great fight.
Yeah.
Nothing to be not excited about.
Well, I mean, it's
Sure.
one of the obvious ones.
Sure,
but,
sure.
but I think it's a good one.
I mean, I look at the Jacare Vitor Belfort fight, and it's for some reason that fight really sticks out to me. Maybe it's coming at a time when it's not at its height, where it could have been, but
Yeah.
I still feel like it's one of those fights.
Choice.
Well, I was still getting to my best one, but I still think that Almeida and Garbrandt. I mean, to me, like we were talking about with bantamweight, when you have two guys who basically have shown nothing but prowess, coming, colliding early in their careers, it's just like. You feel like it's almost wrong for them to intersect right now and kill one of each other off or set one of each other back. But they're so young in their careers, and I feel like they're their own barometers. They're going to test each other, and I feel like that fight's just, especially talking to guys like you talk to either guy, they are so young in this game and have such success that I really think they both feel they're infallible at this point. They're still in that invincible mode, and I think when they get in there and do it, it's going to be a really, really good fight.
It's like the anti-boxing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted,
Yeah.
someone wanted to say, well, what's the difference? How does MMA
I'm
run
always-
different than boxing?
And I'm always torn on
You
those
point
type of
that
fights
out.
because you hate to see one of those guys derailed as they're just getting into that top 10 space and really going up there.
We had Cody Garbrandt in the studio. He was doing the media rounds at, 197, I guess, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we had him on, and he was pleasant. He was great to talk to. And you mentioned the minute we brought up TJ Dillashaw, I swear to God, he started doing this. He could not sit still, and he was moving his hands. He is an animated guy. He is. I mean, to your point, you get these young guys. They're full of, we say in the Marine Corps, like full of piss and vinegar, man, and they're ready to rock. So that one's going to be a fun one too.
I agree with all your choices. I don't want to interrupt. I really like that Nelson fight. Just a couple other ones that we didn't mention. I really like the Chris Wade Rustam Khabilov fight.
Sick fight. Yep.
Chris Wade is really good, and not enough people talk about him. Maybe biased because he's a big Knicks fan, but I like Chris Wade a lot. And I really like the King Mo Phil Davis fight.
Yeah.
I like that fight a lot. Like I feel like that's a fight that, I mean, it's two guys who.
Is that the best light heavyweight fight you can make outside the UFC? One of the better ones, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a #1 contender fight for sure. I'd love to see Lee McGeary fight either one of those guys. May's a great month. May is a really good month. That 198 card, but Rotterdam is a very good card. It's sort of flying under the radar because of all the 200 talk and 198 and all that. Rotterdam, Overeem versus Arlovsky. If Overeem wins, does he finally get the title shot?
Has to, right?
Especially with JDS having surgery now.
Right. Labrum surgery. And
Yeah.
he's like, I'll be back in 3 months. No, you won't. You'll be back in 6 at the earliest.
Do they find if it's Verdum who wins next month and because look, if it's Verdum who wins next month and let's say Kane wins in July, do you go with Overeem over Kane against Verdum because they fought twice before? The last fight was not good. They've got some decisions to make there. You go with Overeem.
Yeah, I mean, because first of all, if he gets through Arlovsky, that's 4 in a row. I feel like he's been positioned. He just got his new contract. He's been positioning to be in this spot again. He goes against Verdum. There is a backstory with that because they fought in the Grand Prix, and it's an interesting fight because I remember at the time, Verdum, I don't know what it was, but he just didn't trust his hands. Like you remember that fight, he was going down, begging him to come down, all this stuff. I feel like, to me, if he just fought the way he fights now, he would have went through Verdum back. I mean, he would have went through Overeem back then, but he didn't, and it was almost like he took something from that fight. It was like a starting point for him to realize something about himself.
That's the turning point of his career, in my opinion, that fight. Because
so, I mean,
the
if
next
you
fight,
play
he
it back
fought Roy
now,
Nelson,
yeah.
and he turned into like this Muay Thai killer all of a sudden. He finally trusted his stand-up.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. So, I mean, there's interesting from a nerd standpoint of like, paying attention to that. I feel like it'd be a fun fight.
But as we mentioned earlier, never forget, why does the UFC make fights? Sometimes it's to make sure a place that they go to has a fight that'll work. The UFC is probably going to want to go back to Mexico before too long. Cain Velasquez still has not gotten that win there. So if he looks good against Travis Brown, you may be right, but just never discount the possibility of what Cain Velasquez will do to the UFC's preferences.
Have it somewhere like maybe in a Gaulis or someplace more sea level, right? Like where it's like
Sure, that's right.
It's Acapulco.
I feel like one
Senior
story,
frogs.
one story that hasn't been talked about enough is Greg Jackson and Mike Winkeljohn are the best game planners in the business. I mean, some might be as good, but no one's better than them, in my opinion. They know they helped reshape Overeem, and now they're fighting him. This is a crazy storyline to me. Like, they're actually preparing someone who they helped reshape in Andrei Arlovsky fight the guy. You know what I mean?
It is and it isn't. Like, to your point, it's like really weird.
Right.
And they know this guy. They know his ticks and his preferences and everything else. But you talk to these Dutch fighters, and at the end of the day, he's a Dutch fighter.
Yeah.
They don't care about any of this stuff. It's a very Dutch mentality to be like,
I'll fight
we're
anyone.
friends, we're coaches, you're my brother, we're twin brothers.
Yeah.
And then they'll just hammer each other with fists. Like, it's shocking when you can't appreciate it until you hear him talk about it. They talk about it like, will you have breakfast with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I'll have breakfast with him. Like, it's no big deal. And they're going to go fist fight. So to me, Arlovsky seems to be the one who's actually a little bit more, very much more territorial.
Yeah.
It's our Overeem who's like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Well, doesn't that speak to Overeem and his history bouncing around?
That's
you know what I
Very
mean?
nomadic. I was going to say that. Like he's kind of finds a home, and then suddenly he has to fight within his home. It's just, I feel like he's been searching for that exact sort of identity he's found there with his training camp, and here he is, kind of going out. It'd be interesting to see what comes out of it, like how they get along afterwards.
Yeah, he has to be better, significantly better, I think. Overeem has to, because he's fighting Arlovsky, but he's also fighting against the guys who know. They're going to know whether they can get that message across to Arlovsky while the fight's happening or between rounds or whatever. But you got to know that Winkeljohn is going to know. He's going to anticipate every time that Overeem's throwing a kick. He's going to anticipate every single move that Alistair can throw out there. And it's just a matter of, are they going to be able to get it to their guy, and is their guy going to be receptive to that? But we've also seen that both of these guys have had their moments where they get touched and they go down.
Yeah.
So
Arlovsky's coming off of that, right?
So,
I'm curious to see how he responds from the Miocic KO, a devastating KO.
Yeah.
He does feel a little more, I guess, uncomfortable with the whole situation. And Overeem is just like, oh yeah, we don't really hang out. He's the one playing it up, which I find interesting as well. And Overeem has been in this situation too. In Grand Prix, he fought Tyrone Spong when they were training with each other. So I like that card a lot. I think it's a great card. And like I said, it is being overshadowed by the constant talk of UFC 200, which I got to say, I just want to put a moratorium. And here I am talking about it. Although the fans online, they might be happy that we've gone almost 50 minutes and not mentioned Conor McGregor's name. I'm sorry.
They'll find some way to complain.
Yeah.
I know it.
They're always timing. But do we feel the same way? At the end of the day, it's just a card, right? I feel like we're talking about it too much at this point. Am I wrong? Is it just because I'm too close here to the day-to-day MMA news? Do you guys do you not have UFC 200 overload 2 months out?
Who was it that used the phrase "going to blow your minds"? I mean, that was the president of the UFC, Dana White, who referred to that card in that term. So we should all have expected to had our minds blown.
When you start listening to Dana White.
Yeah, exactly. But instead we've got a good, interesting card. We got an upgrade in the main event. a better fight than what we would have had, or a more consequential fight than what we would have had.
We got killed for saying that last week too, by the way.
Yeah, well, but so it is what it is. Another thing that guy likes to say.
Maybe the worst
At the end of the day.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it is what it is.
I don't mind it at all, actually.
Okay.
I really don't. I'm kind of numb to it after all that Mayweather-Pacquiao stuff. In fact, I think that's the relevant comparison. That's a little bit different. That went on 6, 7, 8 years. Not quite 8 years, but you get the idea. It went on for, actually kind of 8 years.
That fight scarred you, didn't it?
It really changed my perspective on a lot of different things for the better and for the worse. But what it really reminded me was, at the time, I didn't know. I mean, we all knew it was going to be big. It felt big. When the pay-per-view results came out, we're like, holy Jesus, It is true that the fact that people talked that fight to death and then it finally happened, it did raise anticipation. It did raise everyone's interest in it. And I think that's going to work. Interestingly, I think it's going to work for the UFC's benefit for 200, and it's going to work when Conor comes back. Especially when Conor comes back and they make that Diaz fight. I don't know if they're gonna. I'm just saying. Obviously, Dana White has said the opposite, but let's just,
Okay, what would you do?
Well, I think you make that one because everyone has talked that fight to death. Like, why would you not go that? And I can't believe I'm saying this, but now things have changed. You have spent so much energy. When he comes back, if they make that Diaz fight, you're not merely doing the rematch that was already a big sales thing. You're doing a rematch after all that controversy. People have talked it up to death. You would make a ton of cash doing that, man.
It should be Diaz and McGregor. UFC 202.
Yeah.
It should be Nick Diaz.
Oh, look at that. I like the way you said that with that
look. It should be Nick Diaz because I feel like, because there is a little bit of like, why would you do it? Well, then you bring in his brother, right? Wouldn't that be the more compelling storyline? Because you don't really have anything else to do. You don't have any more, like, the only fight he can do is if he's really going to do New York, and with Frankie and Aldo happening so soon before, what do you do with him? In my mind, that would be like the bigger fight. Because he's coming back. He's coming.
Isn't he too big?
No.
This guy fought at 185.
Nick Diaz is way too big.
He could get down to 170 again.
No, he can, of course, but I just feel like it's a mismatch. It's size-wise. He's too big for
Conor went from 145 to 170. Why can't he just bump it up a little bit more?
We were talking about Conor against probably Lawler as a possibility.
Yeah, well, we were all just sort of drunk on the
Instead of 3 breakfasts, he goes with 4 breakfasts. What's the big deal?
And dessert.
I mean, look, but when you had Gunnar Nelson on the hour the other day, didn't he talk about how McGregor doesn't really want to cut down anymore to 145? To me, that just changes everything, and that makes all these kind of the more money-oriented fights more acceptable in my mind. Because the only argument I had against that was you have a weight class, you have a championship belt, and are you not going to ever defend it? Well, if he's ready to relinquish that thing.
I don't know about that.
Or if he's but at a certain point you got to do it. You got to either defend the belt or hand it over to the next guy.
But Nick Diaz, that's a crazy idea.
It's just crazy enough to work,
dude. I mean, Nick Diaz has faced some of the hardest hitters in MMA, and they can't even sit him down.
Okay, what sells more? I actually think the Nate fight. I think Nate.
Yeah, of course, Nate. Sure.
Nate's a bigger star now.
Well, they just have more chemistry together. There's a thing there.
But I mean, Nate's been on extra. He's you know what I mean? Like Nick. Unfortunately, it's not his fault. I mean, you can argue if it was his fault or not.
Definitely
the time off has hurt him. The time off has hurt him, and Nate, for the first time, is actually more popular than Nick. And so, I like what you're. I like the curveball, but I actually think business-wise, that would be a mistake.
Because you disagreed with me before.
Give me Nick
only
Diaz.
to see things come to fruition.
Yeah. Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit is the fight.
Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler too, I would take as well.
Another title fight for Nick? He's got to win a fight before getting another shot at the title.
All I'm saying is, maybe not right then, whatever. At some point, MMA would lose out on something special if they don't make that rematch. That's all I'm saying.
But Nick Condit sells itself. Does it not?
You know, everyone said it the first time and everyone left booing, you know?
I feel like Condit's a little different now, but fair enough. Okay, so Conor has switched things up and he's tweeting a lot and all this stuff, and this, like, it does kind of feel, for better or worse, and you can hate me for saying it, when he's going on those Twitter rants, especially like the one on Monday, which he hasn't, like, if you've looked at his social media activity over the past year or so, he doesn't really interact with fans. It's just him posting stuff. He was interacting with people. Is this a mistake on his part? Like, we kind of tried to be a psychiatrist here. Like, what do you make of this attack by Conor? In the sense, like, plan of attack. You know what I mean? Like this game plan. Game plan.
I don't know that he's really got a game plan, except he's keeping the talk relevant about still, the Instagram post was about Nate Diaz. It was about running it again.
Interesting, right?
Cut the S, that's what he said. So that keeps that part of the public conversation. He was sharing facts, presumably some facts about the business side of things, challenging the idea that Brock Lesnar was the top salesperson in UFC 100 over in sales pay-per-views generally. Personally, I love it. Whether it makes sense in the end or whether it will get UFC to bow, I don't know. But if you're asking me, like just sitting back and watching my Twitter feed that day,
is he coming across as desperate?
Some people have said that. I think he clearly is like, he wants that fight. I don't. That's that's not the craziest thing in the world. But desperate might be a bit of a strong word, I think.
What do you think?
I think that he's not coming across from a position of strength as he always has before when he's gone out there. He always was a guy who was winning, and if you didn't like what he said, well, you just think back to the last thing he did, which was he knocked some guy out. He's always been that guy who talked a good game, but he was backing it up.
Yeah.
Now he's coming off of a scenario where he talked about how I think he said Nate Diaz made more excuses about the first 8 minutes of our fight than I made about the last 2 minutes. Well, the last 2 minutes showed you getting like peppered with punches to the point where you made a desperate lunge for a takedown and they got choked out in seconds. Of course. I mean, so when the last image of you is that, you're going to come across as a sore loser, not as a guy who's shown everybody, I'm going to talk, but I can back it up. He didn't back it up last time. That's it. He didn't back it up last time. So now he comes across as a guy who's a little bit sort of grasping for straws. Not to say that he's irrelevant. I mean, he's relevant as a marketing commodity, but I think that in terms of him being, one of the top fighters in the game, he's got a little work to do.
I do think he's antsy. Like we were talking about this before. I just feel like he's getting antsy because you think about it. Like it was less than 3 years ago that he stepped foot in Boston at Peter Welch's gym in Southie, and he was basically like, "I'm living the dream. This is crazy to me that I'm here and I'm living this dream." Why? Because he got to travel. He was doing these things, right? We're only 2 years removed, like 2.5 years removed from that, and he's changed it so much, obviously. But I think there's part of him that has to go back, and that's still tied to that same mindset of saying like, man. Imagine how, remember how enthusiastic I was just to be given these opportunities to begin with. I think there's some process there. He knows it's obviously changed enough where he knows he moves the needle and he's going to make all this money. But I just think that there's a part of him still that's like, man, what am I doing? I need to you know what I mean? He's still promoting himself, but he's also regretting, I think, that he's not on this card on some level. That's what I see. I don't think that he's, I think he's being the Conor McGregor that he's become, but I think he's dragging the Conor McGregor that he was into that. Does that make sense?
Wow, look at that. That is deep.
Well, I mean, I'm saying because it's not that long ago. It was only 2.5 years ago. I mean, and he was saying things like that. I still think that when he steps back and looks at his life, he's going to be like, wow, I've done a lot in this amount of time. I'm not making this. I can make this amount of money just by, whatever. I'm just saying I sense a little bit of regret, and maybe his regret comes out in that sort of form. You know what I mean?
I mean, to jump on that, I would say that he's reeling a little bit more from his loss to the UFC than he is from his loss to Nate Diaz. He has some explanations for why that Diaz loss happened, and I didn't come in sharp. I didn't use my I lost my cardio. He has a lot of reasons to think that he would come back and beat Nate the next time. But the loss to the UFC, which is, he tried to show how much power he had, and they basically just said, okay, well, we're just going to leave you on the sideline. We're going to go on without you. And I think that's the part that really has knocked him for a loop.
His Instagram posts and all that does quiet the notion that he was afraid to fight Nate or reconsidered. He thought about it over some time. Some people were thinking that.
I mean, come on, these guys are the idea that these guys are afraid.
I mean, look, there was one theory thrown out, which is not the crazy thing. Not that he was afraid to fight him, but it was just like, okay, he sat back. The buzz of 196 went away, and he's like, maybe this isn't the smartest thing at this time, because it is true that the people around him, including all the UFC people, did not want to make this fight. They made it for him. He convinced them to make it, especially at 170. Yeah. So maybe they convinced him, whatever. I do think it's interesting when he was talking about the pay-per-view numbers for 200. Do you guys think, let's say he headlines 202. Does 202, a random card, end of August, headlined by Nate and Conor, do better than 200 on pay-per-view?
Yeah.
That is crazy. Isn't that not crazy?
No.
Given how much we've talked about 200, what it means. I mean, 200 is going to be a business success. it's essentially sold out. 20,000 seat stadium, all that. You go on Ticketmaster, there's not that many available seats.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right.
But you think it will be, can it eclipse that 1.5 number when fans are,
Sure.
Wow.
Absolutely. After everything that's happened, I mean,
That's
they can actually.
amazing.
It's funny you mention that. They can not do a promotional tour for it and still sell.
Absolutely.
I was
I agree
listening
with
to
that.
you on Bruce Buffer's podcast,
thank
which
you.
was
Thank you for
very
taking
well
the
done.
time.
But
I deleted it immediately.
you guys were hitting on something that it was. I think it was Bruce was basically saying that he wanted to be able to see MMA break that 2 million mark, and that's something that it's funny when you really think about it, because I think there's a collective achievement for MMA fans. Each milestone you hit,
Sure.
And I feel like that was one of the things that was sort of compromised in him not being there. Leaves a little bit disappointed. It was going to be historic, it could have been historic in that sense. Like it could have gotten the 2 million buys, and that would have been like this collective, like, wow, look at this, it's still like coming up like this. And that's one of those weird things that goes away. That I know it won't. Obviously it's not going to get 2 million. It's not going to sell 2 million units now. It might do over 1 million, but it's not going to
Which
break
one?
it.
Diaz?
UFC 200. I'm
UFC
saying
200.
now. McGregor himself, at some point, if he's able to keep building like he's been doing, may be able to do it all on his own at some point. But I'm just saying, like UFC 200, that with him at the top and all the things that were going to go on with it, I felt like that was what could happen was 2 million.
And also, if you beat 2 million, it's not just a random number. You beat 2 million. We're talking about some of the biggest fights in boxing history, especially in the heavyweight division. You would beat Tyson Holyfield. You would beat Tyson Lewis too. 1.99. These are like massive, monumental moments. That McGregor, because he even tweeted that he wanted to surpass or match or whatever Pacquiao Mayweather. I mean, slow your roll.
Yeah.
You're not
gotta
even,
shoot for the stars.
You're not even in the ballpark of that. However, he could be in the ballpark of making that incremental progress towards real, legitimate MMA sales history. That's not a small thing.
And again, as he notes, he's young. Those guys are older when they did it.
Which is why they could sell that much.
But let's also recognize that we're talking about sales as opposed to some of the boxing matches you're talking about were some of the most riveting boxing matches in the history of that sport. I love watching Nate Diaz fight. I love watching Conor McGregor fight, but those guys matching up in UFC 202 is not going to be the fight that I'm going to forever live and think, oh, that was I can remember the day when Nate and Conor rematched. I mean, we're talking that's a success of marketing. If the fight card between 200 and 202, if they headline 201 with CM Punk, they would do a ton of pay-per-view sales.
Better than Conor?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about how much, but they would do a ton.
Sure.
But that doesn't necessarily make it good. It just makes it a big sale. And I would put the McGregor-Diaz thing as both an interesting and good fight, but so much of it is about the marketing angle. It's whereas 200 is those are really good, legitimate, relevant fights right from the top down the card. And maybe it's not going to make that big number people are talking about, but that's the kind of MMA that I'm more interested in.
Okay, so McGregor-Diaz, let's say 202, hypothetically, does it beat 200 pay-per-view?
I mean, again, I
just give me a yes or no. That's all I'm asking. I want to know what you want to say.
I'm not a marketing guy.
I just want to know.
I would say yes.
Well, that's significant.
I would say
that's significant.
Because he's a bigger marketing phenomenon. The same thing with CM Punk. I don't know that he would
give him the
beat
compliment
McGregor, but
and move on.
I think CM Punk could beat 200 if in the right scenario.
That's not true.
I don't think so.
That's not true.
No? He's a huge name.
Conor McGregor and Diaz, it's Diet Coke and Mentos, man. It's a chemical.
What is that?
You don't know that?
No, I don't.
Okay, so after the beat, we're gonna go have some.
Don't tell them anymore.
We're gonna have some Mentos, and you can wash it down with some Diet Coke and see what happens.
Good or bad?
It'll be good
for
me.
me.
For us.
It'd be awesome.
Okay,
for me.
your prediction, does it do better?
You talking about 202? Like for 202, if it's McGregor,
Whenever McGregor-Diaz happens,
I think it would do better than UFC 200.
This is significant.
Well, I know that you're right. I think UFC 200, because it's a milestone, it's just like this number, right? I think that sells a certain amount. There's going to be a casual interest in something like that just because we love a birthday or we love some kind of anniversary. We love
it's not the real 200,
commemorative. You know what I'm saying? But it's like I think it'll be commemorated properly. Like there's going to be a lot of money coming in just for that. But at the same time, I just think that McGregor at this point is probably at the height, which is pretty crazy coming off a loss and also after an event like this. I just feel like his star just keeps going higher and higher.
For a second, I thought, Jeff, that you were Mike Chiappetta, channeling your inner Mike Chiappetta. He hates when I ask him pay-per-view predictions.
He hems and haws a lot.
I love that stuff. I can talk about that stuff all day.
It's not just that I feel as though I lack the expertise in understanding what the numbers are going to be, but it's also that I feel like it's sort of a side street in what makes me interested in the sport. The fact that one fight card would sell more than the other does not necessarily make that the card that I'm interested in.
I'm not asking. That's not my question. I was just asking you for a simple yes or no.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yes.
There we go.
No.
Now I'm confused. Let's leave it at that. They're telling us to say goodbye, so I will do just that. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the MMA Beat.
Can we plug the shirt one more time?
Oh yeah, where's the shirt?
It's over there. We don't have it. Oh, you're gonna look at that.
Oh!
There's Bam Bam, Barbarina. Here's our shirt. Limited amount.
There are
left.
only a few left. I know there's
maybe like 10.
Yeah,
less.
I think there's probably less than
Sell it out.
less than 20.
Sell this bad boy out. You can get it over at MMAwarehouse.com. Thank you to them for hooking us up. And again, all proceeds go to Brian Stan's amazing foundation, the Hire Heroes Fund. It's a great cause.
Love it.
Love it. And Brian sent us a very nice email, I thought, thanking us for doing. I mean, tiny, part to his bigger picture, but again, all proceeds go to that. So kudos to Chuck's wife for designing the shirt. There it is.
MMA Warehouse.
MMAwarehouse.com, the MMA Beat. How about that? Personally, I think the nose is a little small, but I'll take it up with the designer.
My shirt.
We are done. Thank you again for watching. We're back next week before UFC 198. Until then, we say goodbye. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the fights.